So having somebody in the patient's corner who understands personally and professionally the implications of diabetes is really important for me.
Nearly 39 million Americans are living with diabetes. We explore the link between diabetes and heart failure and how this woman's diabetes diagnosis shaped her medical career.
From the University of Kansas Health System.
I am amazed. The team here is great.
I came on a Tuesday, and then by Saturday I had a heart in me.
I have never seen a group of people work together so good as this team of heart specialists. I mean, it's just unreal.
Stand by to set up show.
And the Dolph C. Simons Jr. Family Broadcast Studio.
Roll it.
Always makes you feel like you're the most important patient on the planet.
I felt heard, and that was really big.
This is All Things Heart.
Good morning, I'm Alexis Del Cid. Welcome back to All Things Heart. Right now, more than 11% of the American population has diabetes. Diabetes can increase your risk of heart disease as well. And according to the National Institutes of Health, of the 38.4 million Americans who have it, 2 million have type 1. And then get this, there are another 97 million people who have prediabetes. That's more than 1 out of every 3 people you see. You might be one of them. And there are so many myths and misunderstandings surrounding this disease. We're introducing you to a woman taking her personal experience with diabetes and using it to connect with her patients.
I see patients with both type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
It's been years since physician assistant Charlotte Burns first walked into the Cray Diabetes Center at the University of Kansas Health System, and it was much earlier than her first day on the job. She was a patient.
I was diagnosed when I was 19 years old. It was my first semester of college.
She says the signs were there before her diagnosis: unexplained weight loss, having to use the restroom constantly, and always being thirsty. But she and her parents didn't know enough about the disease to know the signs.
Nobody in my family ever had any inkling that I would be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, especially when I was 19. We have no family history of type 1 diabetes.
The diagnosis changed what she chose to study in school, and it changed her daily life.
I constantly am thinking about what my blood sugar is, about every 5 minutes throughout the day. Throughout the night last night, my blood sugar was running low, so my glucose monitor was alerting me and my parents and keeping both myself and my parents awake most of the night.
If left untreated, high blood sugar can have a myriad of devastating consequences, including heart damage. The National Institutes of Health says over time, high blood sugar can damage the blood vessels and nerves controlling your heart. The CDC says if you have diabetes, you're also more likely to have other conditions raising your risk for heart disease, like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and high triglycerides. And the American Diabetes Association says adults with diabetes are twice as likely to have a heart attack or a stroke compared to people without diabetes. Charlotte says the age at which people develop type 1 diabetes is getting older.
I personally have friends and patients who have been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s.
And there are many theories as to why.
So my kind of leading thought is that there must be something environmental that is triggering something within our genetic code to flip the switch to turn your immune system on to attacking your beta cells in your pancreas.
No matter the cause, her message to her patients is what her doctor first told her when she was diagnosed at age 19.
She said, "Are you going to control your diabetes, or will you let diabetes control your life?" I think it's better to think that you can control your diabetes rather than letting it control your life for you.
Amen to that. We are so pleased to welcome Charlotte Burns here on the program, who is a patient and, as you see, a physician's assistant here at the health system caring for people who have diabetes. We also have endocrinologist Dr. Dan Tilden. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your knowledge on this. And to explain the impact to your heart on a deeper level, we're joined by cardiologist Dr. Shannon Hughes Thompson. Thank you for being here.
Morning.
Charlotte, I love what you said about how you're not going to let diabetes control you. What are some of the ways that you do that?
Yeah, I just try to live my life and do the things that I want to do and find ways to make my diabetes fit into that, whether it's making sure my blood sugar is within the right range before I do certain activities, or making sure that I carry low blood sugar supplies with me everywhere I go.
What are low blood sugar supplies?
I personally like fruit snack packs, but small, like 4 ounces of a full sugar soda, glucose tabs as well.
So that's the one time you would want to drink a Coca-Cola.
Yeah, that's
right?
kind of the only time I
okay.
drink soda.
Right. It must be so comforting to your patients to meet you and know you have diabetes, because you know firsthand what it's like. And that's why I want to share something that you said to us that didn't make it into the story that we aired ahead of time, but it's so important.
I could make it so that you have no idea that I ever have had type 1 diabetes or diabetes in general. I prefer to display my insulin pump and my CGM in places that people can see it, because I can add to people's knowledge of what diabetes technically, quote unquote, or does not look like. So I think it's important to show your invisible illness when you can and inform people and kind of provide a new frame of mind for them.
So we know we're going to ask you to show it.
Yeah,
she
sure.
dressed up so nicely. She wore a blazer today. Normally, though, she's going to show us how she keeps her stuff visible. What are those?
This right here on the bottom is my continuous glucose monitor, and this up here at the top is my insulin pump.
So when you say CGM,
Yep.
it's the continuous glucose
Correct,
monitor.
this one.
How do those two things work together?
So my continuous glucose monitor reads my blood sugar every 5 minutes and then sends the reading to my insulin pump. And then the algorithm within my insulin pump allows it to change how much insulin I'm getting.
Are you seeing in real time when levels are going up and down? Is it alerting your smartwatch too?
Yep, I have an app on my cell phone that alerts me every 5 minutes, and then it also reads to my watch.
So I can't imagine getting any alert every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Does it vibrate your wrist? Does it beep? Is that all night long as well?
Yep, so as long as my blood sugar is within range, so that's 80 to 180, it does not alert me. I can still see the readings on my phone and my watch if I choose. But every 5 minutes, if my blood sugar is above 180 or below 70, I will get vibrations on my watch and then alerts on my phone.
So it will wake you up
Yes.
if something's gone, which you want, if
Yes.
something's gone amiss. Are there ways that people can receive insulin or check their blood sugar if they don't want to wear those two things?
Yeah, so kind of the standard to check blood sugar is finger stick glucose. So that's where you have a meter, a test strip, and then you poke your finger and test the little bit of blood, and it'll tell you your blood sugar at that moment in time. We recommend that patients do that 3 to 4 times a day, or however your endocrinologist or primary care is recommending. And then insulin-wise, you can take insulin injections through a needle and a pen. So that's just at your own will.
So it sounds much more pleasant and convenient to wear the
Yes.
continuous glucose monitor and your pump. Why would someone choose the other methods?
Many different reasons, just personal preference. Some patients don't enjoy having devices on them that other people
Sure.
may see. It kind of limits you as well in some aspects, having to disconnect from your pump before you go into water in some instances, as well as there is the cost component that's very important to discuss as well. These devices are, unfortunately, generally very expensive, even with insurance coverage.
And that's where we get into the topic of accessibility.
Right.
And not everyone has the same access to things that can help them. Dr. Tilden, you have done extensive research on diabetes. Can you explain the difference between type 1 and type 2?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the problem with everyone with diabetes is that they don't have enough insulin. And so the difference between type 1 and type 2 is really how they get there. And so people with type 1 diabetes, the problem, as Charlotte said earlier, is it's an autoimmune condition where your body is actually destroying the insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. And so you get to the difference between having how much you need, how much insulin you need, and how much insulin you make, because your body starts making less and less insulin. And so we see high blood sugars as evidence of that difference between how much you need, how much you need, and how much you make. In type 2 diabetes, the problem is not that you don't make enough insulin, and in fact, people after their initial diagnosis with type 2 diabetes typically are making more insulin than they were several months before. But it's that the pancreas can't keep up. So people have increasing needs for insulin, and that's what we call insulin resistance. That typically goes up with
Is your
insulin
beeper going
resistance.
off?
Sorry, that's me.
No, be sorry. What does that mean? What's it
That's
doing?
my insulin pump is going to die in a few hours, so I need to change it later.
Oh, that's good. That's smart.
Yep.
It's a good thing I'm sitting here,
It
right?
is.
Yeah, that's great. So, okay, so then,
yeah, so the people with type 2 diabetes, they have an increasing need of insulin, and so they make plenty, but that need just exceeds what your pancreas can make. And so you get the difference between how much you make and how much you need by increasing needs of insulin because you become more insulin resistant over time.
I'm going to ask you a few more questions.
Please.
Don't worry, I'm going to get to you in a bit about the heart component.
They're the experts, they really are.
But I want to ask you about the continuous glucose monitor and the information provided on that.
Yeah.
And while we're looking at that, we have a graphic that can show real quick what's pre-diabetes.
Yeah, so pre-diabetes is actually what we see before diabetes develops. And so it's a risk condition that tells us that you're at higher risk of developing diabetes. And so what we see in that situation is that people are in that stage where your insulin resistance is going up, but your body can almost keep up. And so that difference between how much you make and how much you need is relatively small. And so we only see high blood sugars at particular times or during times of stress. So you might get sick and your blood sugars might be a little bit higher, or if you eat a meal with lots of carbohydrates where your body needs to make lots of insulin, it can't quite keep up in those situations of stress. Exactly.
Now to the continuous glucose monitor. We have something that just looks like squiggly lines to us.
Absolutely.
What do you see when you look at this? What is it?
Yeah, so the first thing I always look at is that sort of set of bars up at the top right. There's a number, Charlotte mentioned this earlier, the green bar is called the time in range, and so that's really the number that we look at that helps us understand how well the diabetes is being managed. Below that is the time you spend below the range, below 70. So having low blood sugars, as Charlotte said as well, can be really uncomfortable and can be life-threatening. And so we want to limit or reduce or eliminate the amount of time we spend below the range. And so what we're trying to do is optimize our insulin dosing to keep people in the target range between 70 and 180 for as much time as we possibly can.
We have another look at how you can get this information. Is
Absolutely.
this, what are we seeing here? I see more colors.
Yeah, so this is these are two different manufacturers in the way that they display the information, but you can still see now at the top left that same bar that tells us the distribution of the high and low blood sugars. The longer graph in the middle, that is sort of a daily calendar of what your blood sugars are doing. So at the far left, you have midnight, and then right in the middle is noon, and then all the way to the right is the next midnight. And so it's a way that we can see patterns through the day of how blood sugars tend to go for people. And so, for example, in this graph, you can see that those blood sugars tend to rise through the day. And when I see that, that tells me is that this person likely needs to increase the amount of insulin they take during around meal times, because those blood sugars are going up through the day as you eat, and then they go back down overnight. And so that's one of the things that we do when patients come and see us in clinic.
Sure.
Is we look at those readouts, look at those printouts, and talk together with patients about how this may or may not match up with their experience with their treatment of diabetes, and what adjustments we might need to make to the regimen that we have prescribed.
Now I want to get to Dr. Shannon Hoos-Thompson about the heart. We talked a lot about how diabetes can damage your heart. How exactly does the high blood sugar do that?
Well, it's cell dysregulation. And if you think
Wait,
about
what's
the heart,
it? Cell what?
Cell dysregulation.
Dysregulation, okay.
So, I mean, bottom line is it puts the whole cellular pathways, it's like no two cells are doing the same thing because their demand for glucose or insulin and the mismanagement of that. I mean, that's the energy block for cells. So on a cellular level, there's disarray, there's disorganization between the two cells. And again, if you think about the heart, it's the one organ in our body that is constantly doing something.
Yeah. So it's multitasking
moving in a
too
physical
much.
way.
Is that it?
Say that again.
It's multitasking too much? It's just distracted
No,
with
it just causes, again, when you say dysregulation, it basically comes down to the the efficiency of the heart becomes less.
Okay.
And the dysregulation of cellular energy is ultimately what happens. And so ultimately it can lead to heart failure, but more importantly, diabetes causes dysregulation of the blood vessel itself. So the blood vessel, the arteries, are living tissue themselves, and the dysregulation within the blood vessel, the cellular walls, the innervation, the nerves, the glucose use within that blood vessel, and so you get that vessel itself doesn't know if it should constrict versus expand, and then it crystallizes and stiffens, and so it can't function. So the blood vessels themselves become dysfunctional, and the very vascular organ that the heart then becomes dysregulated, and you end up with mismatched blood supply, and that's where you end up with
Get the scary
heart dysfunction.
Wow.
Yeah, it doesn't know what to do and when to do it, and it can't really match up to stay on target.
Is there a way to reverse that damage to your
Control
heart?
your glucose. You can stabilize it. So you stabilize it first, and then as far as reversible damage, there's again a spectrum as far as how much is permanent versus how much is better able to be managed. So that's just it. And if it's stabilized, then the heart can then compensate, which goes back to like prediabetes or regulation of diabetes, what other form you have, is once it's stabilized in the body and the heart in specific tissues, can then compensate and go back into a compensated mode, versus if it's unregulated, it's uncompensated, and that's when bad things happen.
That's when it happens. How quickly does it happen? If you have high blood sugar, how quickly does the damage to your heart set in?
I would say that's variable because there's so many factors that you have to consider. The answer is if you have poor regulation of your glucose at whatever level and for whatever reason, there's instability there. And as far as when that instability leads to a sudden event, like a heart attack, versus chronic changes in blood vessels that leads to chronic ineffective blood supply to your heart, which is probably, or any organ, which then they all tie together.
They all, yeah, everything's connected.
So how quickly, the answer is hard to say. I would say being a type 1 debtor, longer is worse. Dysregulation for longer is worse. How quickly, as far as given it, days, years, hard to say. But it's an ongoing process that you can't let go of at any point.
Charlotte, you were diagnosed at 19, but you had had symptoms for a while. Were you then feeling stress on your heart? Did you have any noticeable effects to your heart?
Not that I'm aware of at this point in time.
Which is good.
Yes.
We have a picture we want to put up, and this is an image that is one of the few images on a medical program that I think everybody can understand. Well, this is a great picture of Charlotte in the hospital. That was when you were 19?
Yes, that was when I was 19. Yep, almost 10 years ago.
Oh, you're the ripe old age of 28 now?
Yep.
We want to show another image, and it shows a variety of things that can affect the heart as well. And Dr. Hoos Thompson, this is one of the things I was saying, I can finally understand a medical image that we put on the screen. Talk us through these other things that can affect our heart.
Well, again, when the body's such an intricate thing, or existing thing, and in bottom line is it recognizes that dysregulation that's going on, and so it's trying to compensate. It's trying to make it, and this is how it does it. So it has different ways of metabolism. So sometimes it'll try to shift the type of metabolism it's doing. A lot of times you'll see things like blood pressure go up. You'll see changes in coagulation. You'll see changes in your cholesterol, especially your triglycerides. Like when I see somebody with a disproportionate high triglycerides, like, okay, they're not regulating their glucose right because they're shifting how they're metabolizing.
How did the hamburger and pizza slice play into that?
Yeah, why do you got to do that to my
couch
lunch?
potato.
I mean, seriously. It's like, and again, I talk to people
things.
not just about, sometimes you have to be more specific with foods and others, depending on where you are on the spectrum of diabetes and things like that. But I talk to a lot of people about, hey, you can have a sandwich for lunch in a drive-thru. You can't live there, but yes, you can go through, or you can grab a piece of pizza, but you can't add the French fries. You can't add the pop. You have to learn to manage portion, and you have to learn how to, again, balance that and rework it.
What did you have to change with your eating? I think changing your eating in college would be very difficult.
Yeah, it was definitely difficult in college, especially since I went to a college that only had one cafeteria and we had to live on campus all 4 years.
And everybody has snacks in their dorm room.
Yes.
Twizzlers and candies and cookies.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I talk about moderation, everything in moderation. I enjoy eating cookies most days of the week, but I know, okay, if I'm going to have cookies at this time, I need to account for it with my insulin and my physical activity earlier in the day, as well as I can't eat the cookies plus pasta for dinner and have a soda. I really enjoy eating Cheerios for breakfast in the morning, but I know the specific ways that I need to account for that elevation in blood sugar despite giving myself insulin.
And I was going to ask Dr. Hoos-Thompson how you can control your risk of heart complications. I think you've both said it, controlling the glucose.
So your diet is great, physical activity is great, but you have to commit to it. Again, you don't have to just cut things out, but you absolutely have to control portions and distribution with that, and you have to stay aware of it. Is a big thing. Yes, medications, and we continue to make amazing, not just with the insulin and making sure you have enough insulin, but also helping with your cellular pathology, controlling weight, and your physical fitness and just your body makeup, muscle versus fat versus all the other tissues.
All the other stuff that's happening. And speaking of medications, let's get to the medications that have been in the news so much, Dr. Tilden. We hear about things like Wegovy and Ozempic, but lately we hear about them connected to weight loss. Right. Weight loss, and they were first made for diabetes. How does taking those medications protect your heart? Does it protect your heart?
Yeah, they do a really fabulous job of that. And I think it's the first thing that's important to know is that those medications actually are approved for type 2 diabetes, which is the sort of a different form of diabetes than we're talking a little bit about today. So
they can't be used for type 1.
So they can be. That's a great question. And they are very effective, but they can't be only used for type 1 diabetes. And so and they're not FDA approved for that. And so there are certain circumstances where we might consider using those, but from a routine care perspective, type 2 diabetes is really the area where we're going to focus on using those medicines like Ozempic, called GLP-1 agonists. So those medications are particularly good for the heart. And so whenever we, as Dr. Hoos-Thompson was saying, whenever we lower blood sugars as we control diabetes, we see improvements in cardiovascular outcomes, things like heart attacks and strokes. Those get better as we control glucose. But what we saw in the big studies where we looked at these medications like Ozempic and Wegovy, we saw that they lowered their blood sugar, and the comparison group had a lower risk of outcomes. But the people who were on those medicines, those GLP-1s, actually did better, had lower risk of heart attack and stroke, even more than the group who had their blood sugar just controlled to the same degree. And so these medicines seem to have some other additional effects that are protective of the heart and protective against bad things that we worry about with people with diabetes, things like heart attack and stroke.
We have questions coming in. My phone's been buzzing. Your thing's dinging. My phone's buzzing. So we're going to get to our community questions right now. You can send them to us in real time. We are on YouTube, Facebook, the X platform, and the All Things Heart email. You can connect with us right now through all that information on your screen. And I want to go to some questions that are coming in from our Facebook viewers. Juan Reyes wants to know, are these studies or research on environmental impacts like pollution on diabetes and heart disease? Can you explain more about that, Dr. Tilden?
Absolutely. So, the triggers for type 1 diabetes are really unclear. So we know that it's an autoimmune disease, and autoimmune triggers are many and numerous. We know that genetics play a role. We also know that the environment, things like viruses, can play a role. But there are other factors. There's probably a role for random chance, but there are probably other factors that we haven't yet discovered that increase risk for type 1 diabetes and really are the triggering events for the start of type 1 diabetes.
When you say viruses, Everybody thinks COVID.
Yeah.
Is it possible COVID could trigger diabetes?
So we've looked into that quite a bit, and the studies have been equivocal. It does look like it might have had a small effect, but not a significant one, and that's still something we're trying to sort out, even though now we're well into the COVID pandemic. For type 2 diabetes, it's a little bit more nuanced. We know that genetics play a very important role. The environmental factors also are there. So there have been large studies that have shown that people who live in lower socioeconomic status, who have lower socioeconomic status, who live in neighborhoods that are more exposed to certain environmental factors, do have higher risk for type 2 diabetes.
What would be the environmental factors?
Yeah, we don't really understand that, which can be really difficult.
It's not just eating, though.
No, it's not
just eating, which is a myth that's out there.
That's right. So absolutely. So weight gain, as we were talking about earlier, insulin resistance really is the key that triggers type 2 diabetes. And so weight gain is associated on a population level with increased risk for type 2 diabetes. It's not necessarily in any individual that a particular amount of weight gain will cause diabetes, but on a population level, when we think about a group of patients, we know that higher weight puts somebody at an increased risk, or puts the population at an increased risk for type 2.
Marcia wants to share. Marcia writes, I have a friend who was surprisingly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in her 30s. I had always thought type 1 happened only in children and type 2 happened later in life. It is so surprising. Is type 1 being identified more often now in adults, to Charlotte's point? Thank you for pointing that out. And Charlotte, you said you've met people in their 70s who were diagnosed with type 1.
Yes, correct.
Man. Got a comment from Vivian Slater. Vivian writes, timely topic for me. Newly diagnosed with diabetes, and again 2 years ago, now get to do a colonoscopy where I get to go off both Eliquis and Trulicity. Those are what are those medications for?
So Trulicity is one of these GLP-1 medications we've been talking about.
So it's just another brand.
Eliquis is one of Dr. Hughes Thompson's favorites.
So she wants to know, how do I keep diabetes and AFib under control? In the day, I am on a clear diet and no protein. That's tough when you're preparing for a medical procedure. What do you do?
It can be very difficult.
Because you can't have a soda or something.
That's right, yeah. So having to come off those medicines can be particularly concerning. So we've had lots of conversations about what the optimal way to come off of the Trulicity, in particular in that group of medications. And so, for this particular person, and particularly before any kind of procedure where you're having to come off of these medications, exercise can be particularly helpful. Your blood sugars will go down. Your muscles can actually take sugar out of your blood without using insulin. And so when you're moving and exercising, that's one of the reasons why it's so important. And then also drinking plenty of fluids can be helpful. And then talking to your doctor about whether there are other medications that should be started.
Your comment about exercise leads right into Jean Reardon's question. We have one more from our guests. What role does exercise play in lessening the bad effects of high blood sugar? What is happening chemically from the exercise?
So it's complicated is the short answer, but what I can say is that we know that we said, with type 2 diabetes, it's that insulin resistance that's the primary problem driving type 2 diabetes, and we know that exercise actually reduces insulin resistance in the short term, and that it is a really important way that people can reduce their blood sugars also in the short term. And so exercise is really critical as a component of a holistic approach to taking care of your diabetes.
Okay, we have one more. Normally, we peter off on the questions now, but I've got another one from Lucy. Lucy says, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease at age 53. My insulin management system has been phenomenal with the continuous glucose monitor and the pump. So hats off to you educating people about those and being bold and being willing to share what it looks like, because a lot of people don't get to see that and they wonder what it'll be like. It's time now for some final thoughts from our guests, although we could continue this conversation probably for hours. Charlotte, I want to start with you. What's the most important thing you want our viewers to know?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that don't think poorly on all patients who have diabetes. It's an extremely complex disease to have in the first place, no matter what type you have, but it takes a lot of time and effort to really understand your body in and of itself, as well as how to control blood sugar. And then you add into the factors of socioeconomics on top of everything else that is so complicated. So we really have to consider all of the different things going into each individual patient and how that affects their overall diabetes.
Very thoughtful. Dr. Tilden, what would you like our viewers to know?
Yeah, I think to echo a little bit of what Charlotte has said, I think it's just so important for people not just to think about diabetes as something that we treat with medications, but something that really is so interlinked with lifestyle, with things that are really personal to us, like food and exercise. And so it isn't something that you can approach just as, this is something I'm going to take a medicine once a day or twice a day, but it really is something that challenges us from a more holistic point of view, and being willing and open to talk with your doctor about those challenges is really critical for us to be able to take care of people with diabetes in an effective and holistic way, a way that we want to take care of folks.
Dr. Hughes Thompson, take us home. Final thoughts on how this all connects to the heart and what you would like our viewers to know.
Yeah, it's an everyday process, and even if you have a bad day, get back on your feet and take care of it the next day, because if you don't want to have a heart attack, if you're afraid of heart failure, if those things really do drive your decision making to any point, or if you've had those issues in the past, it still matters to manage your diabetes. And again, your diet and your exercise and how you take care of yourself day in, day out is really the foundation. And if you're not doing those things reasonably well, all these great medicines that we now have and in different ways that we can now manipulate or help and jump in and to have an impact really get lost, because it really comes back to you. And we talk about that all the time, Alexis, how you have to put yourself first, and you have to make good decisions for yourself and not beat yourself up if you didn't make a perfect decision, because you'll get another chance at it. You just have to take it.
That's such an important thing. It's such a compassionate thing to say, and it's true, because so many patients judge themselves and I'll just give up. I messed up today, and there's always tomorrow.
No, there is tomorrow, there is this afternoon, there is the next decision that you get to make every day, and so learn from what you did well and what you didn't, and yes, you can do better, and yes, we want to help you, and yes, we're doing it too. So work with us, and we'll work with you, and it's great when it's a team doing it and not just an individual, but you have to start with yourself.
We love sharing the incredible work that our doctors do here at the health system. We also love giving you just a little peek at what life looks like for them outside the hospital walls.
Now for a secret look into the guardians of healthcare at the University of Kansas Health System. Let's go behind the mask.
Okay, Dr. Tilden, this is your first Behind the Mask. Who are these beautiful people?
So that is my wonderful family, my wife Holly and my 2 sons. So, and we are, I'm originally from Kansas City, and we just recently moved back. And so,
welcome.
Yeah, it's been really exciting. So we've enjoyed the Chiefs' victories.
And Taylor Swift.
And absolutely Taylor Swift. My wife is now obsessed. So
right. Good. I'll give me her phone number. We can text each other. I'll put her on my group chat.
Absolutely.
It's all Taylor Swift.
Yeah. So it's been just really fun to be back home and be closer to family and have those opportunities to share with grandparents.
But you moved back during the golden age. This is the golden age of living in Kansas City.
Absolutely.
Now, Dr. Hughes Thompson, we need to ask you about one of your previous Behind the Masks, because we're getting questions, follow-up questions about your cats. You shared this video with us. At one point, you had a lot of cats living at home with you.
Well, I'm a pet person.
Right. But did you rescue kittens, or what? You had
we had
5.
Kittens. Remember the surprise kittens?
Yeah.
Yes, surprise. Yeah. So now those have all found their forever homes.
Perfect.
But that doesn't mean that we don't continue to find new animals for our own home. So we continue to have the 2 English bulldogs. My Pomsky, who had her makeover yesterday, and then my barn cat, and then I do have a Maine Coon, but she got brought in from Russia from my sister, and then my daughter manipulated me to now. So we have a kitten that is not from that litter and was not the mom. And
you know who else loves cats? Taylor Swift. I'm just saying, you guys need to hang out.
My daughter has the karma as a cat.
Right. See, it all ties together. Thank you for sharing that. And Shane, thank you for sharing your family with us. Yeah. Now, finally today, we've discussed cardiac rehab in all sorts of forms on this program, how valuable it is for patients. recovering from heart problems. But have you heard of cardiac rehab? This one was for our Heart Center staff. Okay, he's not a chef, sorry, he's a chaplain. However, he brought some sweet treats. Chaplain Jeff Stanger came up with this idea to bring some pancakes to the heart team at the health system, and he made sure to get them in early enough for the overnight crew. And he had sugar-free options, gluten-free options, and fresh fruit toppings. So that was a great option. So thank you to Chaplain Stanger to treat the cardiac crew. What a nice way to show your support. Overnight shifts can be brutal, and they got some pancakes when they got off the shift, so that's not bad. Thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you to our whole panel. Today is actually the season 5 finale of All Things Heart. So for the next few months, that means we're going to be working on season 6 during our hiatus. Until then, you can still watch encore presentations every Thursday at 8 a.m. on Facebook, YouTube, and the X platform. Then we will be back here with all new episodes for season 6. We go live on September 5th. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
Coming up tomorrow on the Morning Medical Update. Countless Americans want weight loss drugs like Wegovy or Zepbound, but supply isn't meeting demand. So what should patients do in the meantime? I'm Jessica Lovell. On the next Morning Medical Update, we ask if supply will ever catch up and learn how patients can make the most of their time on the weight loss waiting list. Friday at 8.